basically there's going to be a chill, that Europe and the rest of the world, the democratic world, are going to basically say, okay, if this is where you're headed, we're going to ice you out. And then this government will move even closer to Russia. And that is of concern, of course, to all of us.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. On October 26, the Republic of Georgia held parliamentary elections of immense geopolitical stake. The former Soviet Republic was once stridently pro-Western and pro-European, but for the last several years, the country has drifted closer to Russia's orbit, thanks in large part to one man, the oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili. His Georgian Dream Party has dominated Georgian politics for nearly a decade. And with that rule has come some democratic backsliding. This includes a new NGO law modeled on a similar law in Russia that's intended to undermine civil society. But the people of Georgia are still overwhelmingly pro-West and pro-Europe. So this election was seen as a reckoning. The ruling Georgian Dream Party could be voted out, which would stifle the country's drift towards Russia. With some evidence of election improprieties, the Georgian Dream Party declared victory, claiming 54% of the vote. The opposition rejects that, and now the country is in an uneasy post-election period. On the line with me from Tbilisi, Georgia, is Andres Ilves, Regional Director for the Near East and Eastern Europe for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. We discuss what happened in these elections, what accounts for Georgia's drift towards Russia, and what are some of the key geopolitical implications of Georgia's parliamentary elections. One note before we start, I know many of you out there, like me, are UN nerds, or at the very least want a deeper understanding of how that puzzle palace works. I do recommend you check out our sister podcast, To Save Us From Hell. It's a weekly chat show about the UN, and this week we discuss the implications of Israel's decision to ban UNRWA, the UN agency that supports Palestinian refugees. But in order to access To Save Us From Hell, you'll need to be a paid supporter of Global Dispatches. This is one of our premium offerings for those of you who opt to support our work. So please visit globaldispatches.org, buy a subscription, and get informed. Happy listening, and thank you for supporting what we do. All right, now here is my conversation with Andres Ilves, Regional Director for the Near East and Eastern Europe for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Andres, first, I know it is interesting and unique times in Tbilisi right now, so thank you.
My pleasure. It's an exciting time to be here. And this really, really, really is one of the most important moments, not just in Georgia's independent history, but actually, honestly, for the West as well.
So that is what I wanted to dive right in and ask you about. Why are these elections so historically significant and so geopolitically significant as well?
Here's the thing, a lot of countries, obviously democracies at least, have elections every few years. And if the situation were normal right now, this country of just under 4 million people, it's, about the size of Connecticut in terms of numbers of people, and it's about the size of West Virginia in terms of geographic size. It would just be a parliamentary election, which party did better, who's the next prime minister going to be. But as you said, this is a completely different thing. So Georgia, which gained its independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, has had a rocky road back and forth with different political parties coming to power. And the party that has ruled for the past 12 years has been steadily moving the country towards Russia. There's no other way to put it. And frankly, in the eyes of many, this was a referendum between whether the ruling party gets to stay and even deepen an increasingly authoritarian approach to governance and closer ties to Russia, or to move on the path toward Europe, NATO, and the West, which an overwhelming majority, by some counts, 80% of the population, actually would like. And so this really, without being labeled as such, was a referendum between East or West, Russia or Europe. And that's why it's so important, because this country, even if it is just under 4 million people, it borders Russia. It's in a strategic location, the Caucasus. A few countries over are Turkey and Iran. It's hard to exaggerate the importance of Georgia and this election.
So if 80% of Georgia's population sincerely want closer ties with Europe, closer ties with the West, how was it that the Georgia Dream Party, which supports and enacts closer ties with Russia, ended up winning this election?
A really, really, really good question. Well, a couple of things. It's not actually clear that they won. And as we're speaking, a lot of doubt has been cast. In fact, most Western parties, election observers, Western governments, people who have seen what happened on election day, on Saturday, they have really discounted the result. The result, according to the government, is 54% for them. And there is, frankly speaking, nobody other than them and their friends and allies who actually believe that they won the majority. So that's the first thing.
Well, can I just stop you there? Is there like allegations of like ballot stuffing? Is that what the opposition and others are alleging?
It's ballot stuffing. It's, in fact, beating up of people, of election monitors and so on the election day itself. There's a lot of stuff on video of people trying to film what's going on. Government-associated people beating up people who were trying to monitor what's going on. Apparently, some government-installed cameras, which some people felt was a breach of their confidentiality. There were physical altercations, and yes, there's one video that has made its rounds that has been verified of somebody just walking up and physically shoving, like, I don't know, it looks like a dozen ballots in the slot. So there's that.
Okay.
Buying of votes, just a lot of really ugly things have been alleged. And again, pretty much everybody but the government believed did actually happen. The other thing is this, is that the governing party is very clever, and they have, knowing that the sentiment of the country is pro-European, they have cast themselves as the pro-European party, which, if you just look at it, is, on the face of it, it's absurd. But they've been very clever, so they've kind of triangulated that, no, we need to, yes, move toward Europe, but more gradually, not rush into it, do it in a Georgian way. So they played upon a sense of people's patriotism, and a lot of their rhetoric has actually been a kind of unique blend of anti-West and pro-Europe. So we're not going to be forced to join the EU. We're going to do it in our own due time. I should add, by the way, that one of the interesting aspects of Georgian politics is that the Georgian constitution actually mandates that all government institutions have to be readying themselves and moving the country toward integration into the West and into Europe. And at the same time, so they've managed to say, no, we're the pro-European party. If you look at a lot of their posters and so on, it's actually a circle, half of which is their party symbol, and the other half is the gold stars on the blue background of the European flag.
So they profess to be pro-Europe, but in actuality, they're not.
Exactly. And the levels of cynicism in that. But there's another thing that they did, and this is very clever, is that they instead cast the election in terms of war versus peace. And they've come up with this phrase of a global war party. And that basically part of their narrative then aligns with the Russian narrative that basically Russia wants peace, Georgia wants peace, these countries want peace, and it's actually an aggressive West that is causing conflict to be happening. And some of their election materials actually showed a devastation of a Ukrainian city, mind you, a devastation wrought by Russian forces, and then, a sort of happy scene. And they cast it as war versus peace. And if you vote for the opposition, you're voting for war. And I saw a TV commercial where there's a couple in bed, they're turning out the lights to go to sleep. And then the wife says, "Oh, it's election day tomorrow." And the husband says, "Oh, I'm not worried. Georgian Dream will win anyway." And then the next scene is nothing but death, destruction, battles, bombs, and so on. And the woman is saying, "See what happened? You didn't get out and vote for peace." And so they did better than expected, but people don't believe they won.
So, I mean, that's fascinating that they were able, through clever politics, frankly, to at least, if not win, there's doubts about the veracity of the election, but they did do better than expected. And it's just kind of striking to me. I was in Georgia just once, it was 2012, met on a reporting trip. I met with a number of government officials. And, there were EU flags flying everywhere. All of the government officials back then were like young 30-somethings, like incorruptible, pro-European. But over the last, 12 years, there's been seemingly this steady shift. How do you explain that shift from this like young country looking to the West to one that not only just has potentially reelected this pro-Russian party, but the pro-Russian party is enacting reforms that are very much not aligned with Western values?
I would narrow it down to one person, and that is somebody named Bidzina Ivanishvili. Now, this person, it's hard to exaggerate the level of control that he has over the Georgian economy. Let me draw an analogy. It depends on the year, the exchange rate, and so on, and various factors. He controls the lowest estimate is 20%. Some estimates have it as high as one third of the entire Georgian economy. This one individual who made himself a billionaire in the 1990s in Russia when everything was chaotic and people certain, oligarchs managed to arise. This one person basically, arguably owns a huge chunk of the country. Let me draw an analogy. For somebody to control an equivalent amount in the US, it basically would be 20 Elon Musks to be able to come even close to what this individual's power is. And the thing is that he doesn't wear it lightly. So not only does he control a big chunk of the economy, but he, in fact, has gone in and out of politics. He was involved in the beginning when this party came to power, was the prime minister for a period. He has never stayed away from politics. And he basically, behind the scenes, is involved in everything that goes on. And something happened in the past few years where he basically, he's had always strong ties to Russia, having grown up in the Soviet period of Soviet Georgia and the Soviet Union and so on. He's never really lost fully his ties to Russia. And something has happened in the past few years that everybody here would agree that it was his decision to begin to move the politics closer toward Russia. And of course, closer to Russia means away from the West. You can't really do both because at the end of the day, this is one of those countries that the Russians or Putin's government would view as the near abroad because it's inescapable that Georgia does border on Russia.
Yeah, that's interesting. So really, it was something that switched within him over the last few years that drew Georgian politics closer to Russia, which is interesting to me because, you know better than I do, but like many of the key opposition figures were former members of the Georgia Dream Party, but broke with him in the context of Ivanishvili moving closer to Russia.
Exactly. And the thing that just looms everywhere in the background is Russia, and it's inescapable. There was a time when Georgia seemed to have really pulled away. Frankly, if you walk down the streets of Tbilisi, maybe, let's say, 5 years ago, you didn't even hear much Russian in the street, a very strong sense of Georgian identity and so on. Now, because of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, you do have a lot of refugees, and there is more of a Russian feel on the streets in the country. And so there are a couple of other things that presumably at his behest, he's held rallies in favor of this legislation and so on, was quite infamously, they managed to push through a so-called foreign agents law, which is essentially a carbon copy of a Russian law requiring nonprofit organizations that receive foreign funding to register and so on. And this is when I spoke earlier about authoritarianism and so on, that slowly there's increasingly a sense of government control. And much to the shock of many, they have now managed to also pass a so-called anti-LGBT propaganda law. Again, quite similar to what there is in Russia. And one of the concerns, of course, of people who are, believe in democracy and free press and freedom of speech and so on is a sense that some doors are closing. If these organizations have to register, what does that registration imply? It's implied some pretty bad things in Russia. Even if you call it just anti-LGBT propaganda, it's not a great thing to be a gay person, to be living under such circumstances. And this was a country that was viewed as kind of a model for, some of its time of independence for other countries to emulate.
Yeah, it was like a more liberal and more free society than most other former Soviet republics. Can I just ask, do you, as a journalist for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, are you concerned that you might have to pack up and leave?
Well, it's going to depend on really what tack the new government takes. And of course, and this is one of the big questions, is what happens now? So they've declared victory. There's a big rally plan. The president of the country, it's a different type of role of president from the United States one. It's a largely ceremonial role, but she does have some powers, and she has said that she does not recognize the results of the election, has called for people to take part in a demonstration and so on.
And she's one of the people who broke with Ivanishvili when it took that tilt towards Russia. She used to be part of the party, but now is opposed to that party.
Precisely. And so she basically got together with the opposition and looked at the results and the concerns of the election observers, and so has called for a rally. I highly suspect that this won't be the final or only rally. I mean, there were lots of demonstrations and rallies, and there have been for quite some time, against the foreign agents law and various concerns and so on. So a lot depends on how this plays out. The government now says that they can seat the next government, the next parliament as they wish, that it doesn't require recognition by anybody. The opposition of parties have said that they don't accept the result, meaning that arguably, logically, they're not going to be taking their seats in the new parliament. So in terms of where things could go, I don't think there's necessarily a worry per se. Everybody would like to think that this is going to continue to be a functioning democracy with a free press and so on, but it's really not clear. I mean, frankly, with the direction and that the government has been heading, and it does raise concerns, frankly, of freedom of speech. I mean, already if you're beginning to curtail freedom of speech with regard to so-called LGBT propaganda, whatever that means, then already then the signs are not good.
So we're speaking just a few days after the election. What's the vibe on the street in Tbilisi right now?
A lot of people that I've talked to are fed up because they don't believe the outcome. By everyone's observation, there was the European Parliament, the Council of Europe, OSCE, and so on. They called it an election marred by an uneven playing field, pressure and tension, and so on. Frankly, most of the people that I spoke to before the election, they really did believe that this was going to be the moment where the opposition came to power and put Georgia back on its European and democratic course. So I'd say people are fed up and not happy. And so I don't think that they feel a sense of defeat. I would describe it as they feel robbed. Defeat would be if they really believe that the majority was won by the government. But people I talk to just don't. They don't think it's credible. One thing that everybody's scratching their head over, to put it mildly, is that this government claims that it won 300,000 more votes in this election than the last one, and that the opposition got less than 1,000 more votes. Now, for all sorts of reasons, there are lots of analyses out there showing how votes generally change over time and how they're tabulated and so on. There are some really skewed results from some areas that make absolutely no sense. And that, of course, if you can't believe the numbers, then, of course, you don't accept the outcome as defeat in that sense. And it's a different type of vibe. It's one of injustice rather than being crestfallen at losing.
Lastly, just to take a moment to zoom out from the streets of Tbilisi to global politics and geopolitics, what are your interpretations of how these election results may be of geopolitical significance?
They are of tremendous geopolitical significance because if you look at the countries that border Russia today, there aren't a lot of democracies. Frankly, you have 6 democracies on the western side, the Baltic states, Norway, etc., Poland, and then you have a country that Russia is at war with, that it invaded in terms of Ukraine, and then you have a lot of autocracies. At minimum, the worry is that this will become yet another autocratic government with limited democratic rights and limited press freedoms and so on, bordering Russia. I think that is a concern. There's a concern about the trend, because the trend hasn't been good. There are so many governments. I mean, you look at what happened in Slovakia, what happened in so many other countries, where there's been a shift away from a trajectory toward Europe and, frankly, adopting a more pro-Russia stance. At minimum, then, it's yet another country that could be deemed to be in Russia's fold. I'm sure that if these election results hold, Vladimir Putin is going to have another reason to smile. And the idea that Vladimir Putin has reason to smile as a result of an election next door sends chills down one's spine, because a lot of things might be cut off. Already there have been punitive measures taken by the European Union and the US against a lot of actions by this government. They beat up protesters some months ago and so on. So it's that basically there's going to be a chill, that Europe and the rest of the world, the democratic world, are going to basically say, okay, if this is where you're headed, we're going to ice you out. And then this government will move even closer to Russia. And that is of concern, of course, to all of us.
Andreas, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. This was very helpful.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.